We've all been there. A message left unanswered, a call ignored, a cold remark without cause. And the pain doesn't shout. It cuts inward, slowly, quietly. You go silent. He does too. But your silence is filled with expectation. You hope he will notice, change, return. But nothing happens. So what will you do then? Cry? Send a message filled with blame. Try every way possible to make him understand you're hurting. Perhaps you've done all that, and perhaps you've also realized it changes nothing. So what if we did the opposite? What if, instead of reacting as he expects, we held our ground, stayed unreadable, and forced him to confront himself? This is no game. It's how we reclaim dominion over our emotions, how we ensure no one else governs the world within. 1. Stillness. Strength begins where reaction ends. There's a truth few are willing to accept. When someone deliberately hurts you, they are waiting for a reaction. They feed on your stew, your pain, your collapse. Not always because they want to see you suffer, but because your reaction is the clearest sign that they still hold power over your emotions. But what happens if you don't react? No arguing, no explaining, no clarifying, no persuading. What happens when you don't do what they expect? That's when the power of stillness begins to rise. Stillness doesn't mean suppressing emotion. It's not passivity or surrender. On the contrary, it's an active form of self-command, a conscious refusal to let others trespass into your inner emotional space or define your worth by their behavior. They may insult you, vanish without a word, or act with blatant disrespect. But your response, that's yours to govern. And in that very act of control, you're building a mental fortress, a citadel no one enters unless you let them in. When you go quiet after being hurt, it unsettles them. They expect a battle, an emotional storm they can grasp and use to steer the situation. But your silence throws them off balance, like a chess player whose opponent suddenly abandons all expected moves. They lose the initiative. They no longer know what you think or feel. And in that void, they are forced to confront the ease. Stillness carries an undue weight. Words can be twisted, misunderstood, turned against you. But silence, when timed with precision, cannot be denied. No one can distort your silence. They are left only to speculate, to overthink, and in that condition, they falter. To master stillness, we must understand. Emotional reaction is instinct. Calm is discipline. Reaction is easy. Anger, blame, pleading, they come in a rush, especially when pain is fresh. But stillness requires stepping back, pausing long enough to see. You have the right not to play the role they've cast for you. Saying nothing in the face of disrespect doesn't mean you condone it. It means you refuse to hand over the reins of your response. And that refusal is a quiet, unwavering statement. I won't diminish myself just to make you understand I'm hurting. Stillness has another purpose. It creates space for truth to surface. Where words trigger defensiveness or distortion, silence forces others to sit with the echo of their own thoughts. Often, it's in that echo that they hear their own mistakes. Nothing turns someone inward faster than not being able to read the person before them. Above all, stillness protects you. It shields you from saying things you might regret. It guards you from impulsive choice. It gives you space to process your emotions privately, without exposing your most fragile self. In a world obsessed with expression, with noise, with proving a point, deliberate silence becomes an act of profound self-mastery. When rightly understood, stillness isn't weakness. It's the strength not to waste your power on what doesn't deserve it. Like a warrior who need not strike to prove his skill, whose calm presence speaks volumes of his inner strength, so too, your silence tells the world, I don't need to shout to hold my ground. Your silence may or may not lead them to realize their faults. They may return to apologize or not, but that no longer matters, because your goal is no longer to change their behavior, but to guard your inner state. And once your peace becomes the priority, no external act, no matter how cruel, can shake you. This is the core of Stoicism. We do not control others, but we absolutely control how we respond. And at times, the most powerful response is no response at all. Silence isn't surrender. It's the action of someone who knows their worth, who doesn't need noise to be seen, who understands that inner stillness is what lingers in others, not because they were punished, but because they no longer hold sway over you. When you learn to be silent without feeling abandoned, to stand firm without feeling alone, you haven't just moved past someone who hurt you. You've stepped into a new version of yourself, stronger, freer, untouchable. 2. Living fully, refusing to let them be the center of your world. When someone hurts you, the first instinct is often to direct all your attention toward them. Your mind becomes consumed with their actions, their last words, even their prolonged silence. Every thought circles around a single question: why? And in doing so, they, though absent, continue to occupy your mental space. This is the most dangerous trap of pain. It places the person who caused it at the center of your inner world. You fail to notice that every time you check your phone hoping for a message, every time you scroll through social media to see if they have stirred, you're slowly surrendering emotional sovereignty. They no longer have to act. You've already handed them a place they don't deserve. The central seat in your thoughts, your time, your energy. Stoic philosophy teaches that self-mastery begins by identifying what lies within our control. The actions of others, their emotions, their choice, none of these belong to you. The only thing you fully govern is how you live your life, and how you live after being hurt is one of the clearest tests of your character. Living fully isn't about pretending to be fine or trying to make them regret. The goal isn't to retaliate. Living fully is a return to yourself, redirecting the focus from them back to where it always belonged, to you. When you pour energy into enriching your life, you disconnect from the negative emotional loop in your mind. You no longer spend hours dissecting their words, their gestures, their tone. Instead, you begin to invest in what nourishes you: your work, your health, your passions, your positive relationships. Someone truly engaged in life no longer has the bandwidth to monitor someone else's every move. And that very fullness doesn't just help you heal. It sends an unspoken but powerful message: I no longer revolve around you. When they are no longer the axis of your world, they'll start to feel the distance. But that distance isn't calculated coldness. It's the natural result of your return to self. And that's when something curious begins to happen. They become confused. Because once, they were your primary concern. Now, you're no longer reacting, no longer checking in, no longer initiating. Instead, you're busy. You're less visible. You're no longer easily reached. You become a mystery. And that makes them wonder, what is she? Is there someone else? Is she really okay? The human mind is drawn to the unclear. When you're ever present, you become predictable. When you pull back your energy, you create scarcity. And in that scarcity, your value increases. Not because you tried to raise it, but because you stopped devaluing yourself just to keep someone cozy. Stoicism doesn't ask us to fake joy or ignore pain. It asks us to redirect our energy toward what is useful and meaningful. And in this context, living fully is the act of reinvesting that energy back into yourself. The most important thing to understand is this: living fully isn't about suppressing emotion, but preventing it from consuming your time and your life. You may still feel sorrow. You may still ache. But you don't allow that sorrow to paralyze you. You still show up to work. You still learn a new skill. You still follow through on your self-care. You still step outside, breathe, and engage with a world that never stops moving. It's in that act that healing begins, not by forgetting, but by filling your life so completely that there's no room left for pain to dwell. This isn't self-deception. It's deliberate recovery. And that recovery takes patience. You might not feel better overnight, but every step you take, every lunch with a friend, every workout, every page turned, lays a new brick in the image of yourself that they once cracked. Then one day, you'll look up and realize, I haven't thought about them all week. Not because you forced yourself to forget, but because you were too busy living your life. When you begin to live as the center of your own life, not them, not the pain, you embody the essence of Stoicism. To live with intention, with agency, unditched by the whims of the external world. The person who hurt you may notice the shift. They might return, or they might not. They might regret, or continue on their path. But none of that matters anymore, because by now, you no longer live in a world that orbits around them. You've built your own emotional solar system, one where you are the sun, and everything else is merely satellite. And once you claim that position, you'll never again wish to be a moon circling someone else's planet. 3. Mirroring energy without manipulation. In every relationship, the energy between two people is never still. It constantly shifts, shaped by behavior, attitude, and emotional investment on both sides. When one person begins to pull back, the other often senses the shift, even if no words are spoken. And in those moments, how you respond reveals whether you govern your emotions or let the other steer the entire connection. Mirroring energy is a subtle, yet deeply effective principle. Instead of reacting impulsively or emotionally to changes from the other person, you choose to adjust your own energy in kind, no more, no less. This isn't manipulation. It's a way to preserve emotional balance and protect personal boundaries. When someone texts less, becomes distant, or disengages, the most common response is anxiety. The fear of losing connection drives you to do the opposite. Message more, ask more, try harder to fill the void. But the more you do this, the more you tip the energy out of balance, placing yourself in constant pursuit while granting them the privilege to give or withhold affection at will. Stoicism rejects emotional dependence on external factors. So rather than react from instinct and seek validation, One who values self-command takes a step back, observes, and adjusts energy with intention. If the other grows distant, you calmly reduce your engagement, not as pushment or a mind game, but to restore balance in the relationship. Mirroring energy is like holding up a mirror. If they are cold, you don't respond with warmth. If they invest little time, you don't overextend. This reflection is a reminder that emotional investment must, at minimum, be reciprocal. When one gives far more than the other returns, imbalance leads inevitably to pain. What's essential to understand is this: mirroring is not mimicry or revenge. You're not doing it to show them how it feels. You're not trying to hurt them the way they hurt you. If that's your goal, you've turned the act into manipulation, the very opposite of Stoic virtue. True mirroring is carried out in calm. You don't face indifference or force aloofness to appear mysterious. You simply stop where they stop. You expect nothing in return, not even a change in them. You do it for one reason only: self-respect. When you mirror energy, you send a quiet message. I'm open to connection, but I won't lose myself in a one-sided bond. That message is both gentle and firm. It doesn't harm, but it makes clear: if they wish to remain in your life, it must be with sincerity and mutual effort. Mirroring also saves you from a common trap: inventing stories to explain their behavior. When someone grows cold, we spiral into speculation. Maybe they are busy. They are probably going through something. Or worse, what did I do wrong? These thoughts lead to over-forgiveness, self-blame, and continued investment in a relationship you're the only one sustaining. By mirroring, you stop writing stories. You let their actions speak for themselves. If they're truly busy, they'll return when they can. If they are testing how much apathy you'll tolerate, your lack of pursuit forces them to pause and reflect. And in both cases, you preserve your self-worth. Mirroring isn't emotional detachment. You can still care, but you don't force yourself to show it beyond what's given to you. You can still be present, but not excessively. You can still respond, but not perform. Every action flows from inner equilibrium, not from fear of abandonment. One who understands the power of mirroring also knows this: not all relationships are meant to be sustained. Sometimes, mirroring reveals the inevitable fracture, because when you stop chasing, there is no connection left. But that very moment is when truth emerges. No more illusions. No more hoping for what isn't. No more investing where there is no return. In Stoic practice, mirroring energy is a way to express emotional equity, not dominance. It doesn't make you cold. It makes you clear. It doesn't punish others. It spares you the punishment of giving blindly. When you know when to stop, when to adjust your presence accordingly, you protect your heart and gain clarity in every connection. You don't overreact, nor do you disappear. You simply balance, and that balance is the highest expression of emotional self-governance. 4. Kind but not dependent. Gentle but with boundaries. One of the most common misconceptions about kindness is the belief that the more kind and forgiving you are, the more likely you are to preserve a relationship. In reality, kindness without clear boundaries is easily dismissed, even exploited. When you're always ready to forgive, always willing to let things go, always welcoming others back, despite the hurt they've caused, your kindness gradually turns into dependency, and with it, your personal value begins to erode. Stoic philosophy does not reject kindness. On the contrary, it encourages gentleness, avoiding conflict, maintaining moral character, and acting with integrity in all circumstances. But Stoicism also teaches that gentleness must not come at the expense of boundaries. The wise know when to remain soft and when to step back to protect their dignity. To be kind without being dependent means you continue to act with grace towards someone who once hurt you. You don't retaliate with harsh words. You don't display anger as a way to assert yourself. You remain composed. Speak calmly if an encounter happens, but within you, all expectations for their remorse or change have come to an end. This approach renders their usual emotional tactics ineffective. When they return, with apologies or subtle attempts to reconnect, they often expect an emotional reaction, either eager forgiveness or bitter rejection. Instead, you meet them with kindness, steady, unbothered, but not welcoming. That calm unsettles them. They can't read you, can't tell if you still care, or have completely moved on. At that moment, your kindness is no longer weakness. It becomes a mirror reflecting their own behavior. If they once took your love lightly, walked away without explanation, or treated you with indifference, your composed, unattached kindness now shows them you are no longer moved by emotions they once controlled. Stoicism teaches that no one can hurt you unless you allow them to command your mind. So when you remain kind yet firmly boundaried, you're defending your inner territory from intrusion. You refuse to let your emotions become tools others use to gauge their power over you. A person who is kind yet not dependent won't overreact when someone suddenly reappears after long silence, nor will they be overly pleased by superficial gestures of redemption. Instead, they observe, listen, and assess based on reality, not on past memories or expired hopes. They understand that kindness does not mean resuming a role where their presence was once disregarded. Gentleness with limits means you allow yourself to release a relationship you once cherished, if that's what's needed to protect your internal balance. You don't do this with drama or resentment. You don't block them, write accusations, or make noise. You simply withdraw your energy in silence, sending a clear message. This relationship no longer meets the standard of mutual respect. Every connection requires balance. When you give too much, constantly forgive, and always accept without requiring change, you create a lopsided world where you strive to maintain what the other takes for granted, believing you'll never leave. But when you set limits, you restore order. You demonstrate that kindness is not submission, and gentleness is not a license for repeated harm. Bounded softness means you don't shut every door, but you don't leave them wide open for anyone to walk through at will. If they have truly changed, they must prove it through action, through consistency, through time. You don't deny second chances, but you no longer give them freely. Stoic philosophy emphasizes self-control, not only of emotion, but of action born from internal values. When you uphold kindness without needing validation, you're operating as someone's emotionally moe. You don't need to assert yourself through hardness or softness, but neither will you become so soft as to lose your identity. To be kind yet not dependent is to face the one who hurt you. Look them in the eye and smile, not because you want to reconnect, nor because you still love them, but because you are no longer ruled by them. You remain polite, measured, kind. But inside, the boundary is clearly drawn. When others no longer hold sway over your emotions, they no longer control the story between you. And in that space, you no longer need their validation, their apologies, or their admission of guilt, because you have stepped out of dependency, and your kindness is no longer tied to being loved back or being understood. 5. Elevate your standards without making announcements. In relationships where one party feels hurt, the usual reaction is a desire for the other to recognize their wrongdoing. The hurt often express things like, "I deserve better," "I won't accept this behavior anymore," or "If you love me, you need to change." Such statements may arise from a just need, but they can also be an attempt to assert worth in the face of emotional pain. However, in Stoic practice, true change lies not in declarations, but in quietly living by a new standard without prior notice. When you begin to act in alignment with your values, uphold your principles regardless of others' behavior, you're elevating your standards in silence but with force. Raising your standards is not about appearing superior in someone else's eyes. It has nothing to do with boasting, one-upmanship, or proving a point. It's the quiet embodiment of self-worth through your choices, your boundaries, and your decisions in daily life. When you no longer react to what once unbalanced you, when you stop accommodating neglect, when you refuse relationships that lack respect, you have begun living by a higher standard. In daily life, this manifests in small but definitive responses. If you once waited patiently for someone who canceled at the last minute, you now decline to do so again. No anger, no blame, just quiet refusal. If you once reacted strongly to disregard, now you remain silent and withdraw your energy, no longer pleading or seeking justification. Consistent action is the most powerful declaration. Not through words, not through anger or ultimatums, but through how you adjust your presence in someone's life according to your new boundaries. When someone behaves poorly, you need not condemn, argue, or demand change. You simply withdraw. That absence speaks louder than anything else about the standard you now hold. Raising your standards doesn't mean becoming cold or distant. It means no longer enabling the kind of behavior you once tolerated. You understand that forgiveness doesn't mean allowing repetition. You separate kindness from submission. You reset your framework so that anyone who wants a place in your life must now rise to meet you, rather than expect you to lower yourself. When you begin living by your new standards without speaking them aloud, others will feel the shift. They'll notice that what once worked no longer does. They may be surprised, may resist, may even test your boundaries. But if you remain steady, they will come to see. You are no longer the same. Elevating your standards also means reorienting how you use your time, energy, and attention. You no longer engage in shallow conversations, one-sided relationships, or situations where you shrink to feel accepted. You invest in what holds meaning, in people who honor boundaries, in pursuits that sharpen your mind, body, and spirit. No need to post it online. No need to tell anyone. Your way of living will naturally filter who remains in your life. Those no longer aligned will drift away. Those who respect you will adapt. You won't have to push anyone out, nor will you cling to anyone. Your standards will do the sorting for you. This is a quiet journey. No dramatic goodbyes, no loud confrontations, just silent rituals of shallow meetings, silent unread replies to careless messages, silent no's to things that once drained your strength. Each of these is a brick in the foundation of your new standard of living. Stoicism insists that action, not speech, reveals philosophy. When you no longer explain or demand, but live your values in silence, you've mastered not only emotion, but life itself. Because the ones who speak most often are still uncertain, while those who are clear simply live, and everything else rearranges accordingly. When you raise your standards, fewer people may remain, but those who do are the ones willing to walk beside you with respect and equality. Gone are relationships built on endurance. Gone are ambiguous ties. Every conversation, every encounter becomes clearer, more grounded, and aligned with the values you now protect. No one can treat you beneath the level you treat yourself. Therefore, raising your standards doesn't begin by expecting others to change. It begins with how you choose to treat yourself each day, in your work, in love, and in every decision, no matter how small. 6. Become the one they cannot read. People naturally seek certainty. In relationships, especially those with emotional history, patterns of prediction emerge. She'll text back right away. He'll be upset if I do this, or she won't let that go. When someone becomes predictable, they become a familiar pattern, and the other's control over the emotional dynamic grows. Becoming someone others cannot read isn't about intentional mystery or injecting tension into the relationship. In Stoic thought, it's not seen as a tactic of manipulation. Rather, it's the natural result of maintaining inner stability, not reacting to others' expectations, and not allowing your emotions to be governed by external forces. When someone is used to you reacting emotionally, sadness when neglected, anger when rejected, anxiety when ignored, they learn to influence your behavior by modulating their engagement. But when you stop reacting the way you once did, when you maintain composure regardless of circumstances, they begin to realize the old tools no longer work. Being unreadable isn't about erratic behavior. A person who swings from cold to warm isn't unreadable. They are volatile and often hurtful. In contrast, unreadability in the Stoic sense is the ability to remain emotionally consistent without being manipulated. When they expect you to erupt, you smile. When they seek explanation, you stay silent. When they aim to argue you casually walk away. This unsettles them. They can no longer predict your next move. And what can't be predicted can't be controlled. Emotional authority returns to you. You are no longer reactive. You are now the one directing your internal state. This doesn't mean you don't care. On the contrary, you still feel, reflect, and consider. But you no longer express those emotions in predictable ways. You process them internally, place reason above impulse, and reveal only what's necessary at the right time, in the right manner. You don't rush to show outrage. You don't chase closure. You offer no emotional leverage for others to adjust their actions based on what you reveal. This ability to shield your inner state isn't concealment, it's conscious boundary setting. When people can't easily access your mind, they are forced to shift their behavior if they want to remain connected. You're no longer a weakness to exploit. You've become an autonomous being, with depth and self-governed principles. Becoming unreadable is also about adaptability. If you respond to everything in the same way, always replying instantly, always saying yes, always forgiving after an apology, your actions lose value because they demand no effort. But when your responses become more flexible, sometimes you reply, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you engage, other times you step back. Your presence begins to carry weight. Unreadability here isn't ambiguity. It's the discipline to tailor your response to the situation, not to emotional impulse. You don't act from fear of upsetting others or being left behind. You observe, assess, and respond from principle. When others see you are no longer as before, they may test you by withdrawing more or being unusually sweet to provoke reaction. But if you stay centered, you'll pass these tests untouched. The more grounded you are, the more unreadable you become. Not because you're playing a game, but because your calm becomes the clearest sign that you're not easily shaken. In Stoic practice, one who doesn't react emotionally is not cold. They are no longer a slave to feeling. They don't strain to appear strong, nor do they need to declare anything. They remain steady, like still water, not because they don't feel the waves, but because they refuse to let the waves decide the direction. Unreadability, when born from internal steadiness, becomes a natural form of gravity. Not because you're playing hard to get, but because others sense they can't predict you, and thus must take you seriously. This also becomes a filter for relationships. Those who seek you only to feed ego or validate themselves will soon withdraw when they realize they can't control you. But those who truly respect you will stay because they see that you're not driven by chaos, but by clarity. Being unreadable isn't the goal. It's the outcome of conscious living, of knowing your limits, and not exposing your emotional world by reflex. You don't need to change who you are to become unreadable. You simply need to stop reacting instinctively and refuse to let emotion dictate action. When you do this, you not only force the one who hurt you to reconsider their behavior, you gradually reshape the way they see you. No longer dependent, no longer predictable, no longer controllable. 7. Turning disappearance into a lesson. In a relationship, especially one where emotions once ran deep, disappearing is often seen as the final act, an ending marked by absence. It might be a quiet retreat after sustained hurt, or a decisive move upon realizing the other no longer respects your boundaries or values. Whatever the reason, disappearance, when done consciously and with clarity, can become a profound lesson, not only for the one left behind, but also for the one walking away. In Stoic philosophy, no action is meaningless if placed within the right context of self-mastery. Disappearance, when not a form of escape, but a deliberate act to preserve dignity, is the first step toward inner restoration and reasserting personal worth. When you stop explaining, when you stop arguing, when you stop holding on, and instead choose to withdraw in silence, not because you feel nothing, but because you recognize your presence is no longer honored. That is not a weak ending, but a powerful boundary. That disappearance resounds louder than any words. It forces the other to face a void that can't be filled with apologies or soothed by casual gestures. When you are no longer there to react, to engage, to show up, they are left alone with the very emptiness they created. While words can be denied, justified or twisted. Absence is an undeniable signal. I am no longer here because this no longer aligns with the values I live by. It is a silent message, but the strongest one. It asks for no agreement, no validation, yet compels reflection. Stoicism teaches that we don't need to respond to every injustice, nor must we reclaim justice through speech. Reaction often fuels what we intend to hide, but a well-timed withdrawal is a way to protect oneself without waging war. A resolute choice by someone who knows where to stop. Disappearance should not stem from unresolved pain, but from clarity. The understanding that staying in a place where you are not respected is a betrayal of your own values. And when the other realizes you are truly gone, no more messages, no more appearances, no more reasons to reconnect. They must confront the silence that your emotional presence once filled. Not everyone sees value when you're still there. Many only understand it once the familiar vanishes. The extended silence forces questions to echo in their minds. Where did she go? Why disappear without a word? Has everything really changed? And those unanswered questions strike deeper than any conversation ever could. However, for disappearance to become a lesson, you must remain consistent after choosing to leave. If you return after a few days because you can't bear the solitude, if you respond to their half-hearted attempts, you undermine the entire message your disappearance conveyed. They learn only that a brief silence is enough to bring you back. In contrast, if you uphold your boundaries, resist weak and inconsistent signals, your absence solidifies into an undeniable truth. And in that truth, they must shift their perception. From assuming you'd always be there, to accepting that your presence has limits. Disappearance in the Stoic sense is not a punishment. You do not withdraw to cause pain or spark regret. You withdraw to preserve inner peace, to stop investing in a space where emotional returns have been reduced to repeated harm. You do not hope they'll realize, but if they do, it's a natural result of the consistent conduct you maintain. Absence also carries a deep psychological effect. It forces others to speak with themselves, with no one left to argue with, to explain to blame. They are left alone with their actions, and no echo from you to drown them out. And it is often in this silence that change, if it comes, begins, not because you demanded it, but because they truly grasp what happened. Not everyone will reflect after you disappear, but that is not your burden. The lesson doesn't lie in forcing someone to change, but in expressing your boundaries through action, not words. You don't need to teach them a lesson. You simply live according to your standard and let them learn if they're ready. In the end, disappearance should not be seen as an ending, but a beginning. For both. For them, it is the beginning of reevaluating what they had and lost. For you, it is the beginning of a more conscious, grounded life, one no longer placing your worth in another's hands. 8. Self-development. Never let pain go to waste. In the course of life, everyone at some point experiences deep emotional pain. It could be a broken relationship, a sudden betrayal, or the long silence of someone who once meant everything. Such moments bring us to a halt, leave us shattered, and make us question our own worth. But precisely at that lowest point, a critical choice appears: to remain trapped in sorrow, or to rise and begin rebuilding oneself. Stoicism sees pain not as an enemy, but as a tool for filtering and refining. No one arrives at inner strength, without having endured hardship. And what sets people apart is not the ability to avoid pain, but the way they respond once it strikes. Pain, when wasted, becomes a dull wound that keeps reopening, dragging along gloom and confusion. But if transformed properly, it can become a powerful fuel for personal evolution. Self-development is not a slogan. It is a series of concrete actions. When you're hurt and choose not to drown in suffering, you begin asking essential questions. What in me allowed this pain to take root? Where did I abandon myself? What must I strengthen to prevent this from happening again? These questions are not about blame, but about recentering yourself after the storm. The first step in self-development after pain is to reclaim personal discipline. In grief, it's easy to let go. Eating poorly, sleeping too little, avoiding movement, numbing out on social media or rebound relationships. But to not waste your pain, you must return to core principles. Control what can be controlled. That means your body, your time, your daily habits. Maintaining exercise, eating clean, and sleeping enough are not just physical recoveries. They are a declaration to yourself that you are still in command. Once your physical foundation is reset, the next step is investing in intellect and emotional depth. This is the time to read, learn new skills, expand your knowledge, or engage in contemplative practices like meditation, journaling, or absorbing content that reframes your thinking. These activities don't make noise, but in that silence, your new self is slowly forged, steadier, wiser, more grounded. Developing yourself after hurt also requires the courage to revisit past choices without judgment. Many react to pain by blaming themselves harshly. I was so stupid. I should have known better. I deserved it. But that's not a Stoic mindset. Stoicism teaches us to review our behavior rationally, not emotionally, to release guilt and extract wisdom instead. You may have erred, but you are not defined by that error. What defines you is what you do afterward. When you reframe your thinking, adjust your boundaries, reselect your companions, or better express your values, you ensure your pain was not meaningless. You turn it into a chapter in your becoming. Self-development also means redefining your life goals. After pain, many feel empty, no longer oriented around someone, no longer anchored by a familiar story. This is a vulnerable phase, but also a rare opening, a chance to design a new path where you are at the center, not the one who hurt you. This may be the time to learn a skill you delayed, revisit an abandoned project, or reconstruct your values on stronger ground. Pain, too, can be transformed into empathy. Once you've known heartbreak, you better understand the suffering of others. And if this empathy is nurtured wisely, it can lead to deeper connections and more humane living, all while maintaining clear boundaries. Throughout this process, growth isn't always visible. Some days you'll feel powerful. Other days it'll seem like you're starting over. But as long as you continue to act, even in the smallest positive ways, you've refused to let pain become a festering wound. Instead, you've made it the material for building a stronger version of yourself. In Stoic thought, pain is a natural part of life. No one escapes it. But what separates the mature from the perpetually wounded is this: the mature learn from pain, the others live in it. And once you realize that every wound carries an unlearned lesson, you stop fearing, stop blaming, and begin asking the only question that matters. What am I meant to learn this time? Looking back on the journey of practicing these 8 principles, I realized that the hardest part isn't understanding. It's consistent application, especially in moments of emotional turbulence. Not reacting when hurt, not clinging when abandoned, not pleading when devalued. All require an inner strength not everyone possesses at first. But that doesn't mean it cannot be cultivated. I've personally faced moments that pushed my self-worth to the edge. And in those moments, I learned my first Stoic lesson. Turn inward and govern yourself, instead of trying to control others. From choosing silence over sending a long message to explain, to stepping into the gym instead of rereading old texts, each small act was a quiet affirmation. I choose myself for self. No one can change the past, but we can choose how to respond to the present. And strangely enough, when I stopped trying to be understood, stopped hoping they'd return, stopped seeking to make them regret, I was the one set free. True freedom began the moment I stopped placing my value in someone else's hands. Practicing Stoicism isn't about becoming cold. It's about reclaiming sovereignty. And once you understand that, every wound becomes a step closer to coming home to yourself. If this video spoke to something within you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss what comes next. Because sometimes, awakening doesn't begin with light, but with the moment you walk away from what once made you dim. See you in the next video.